This is the BBC World Service, also podcasting via the BBC News website. Hello, I'm Gareth Mitchell, and today the millionaire space tourist who's come back down to Earth with plans for pushing at the envelope when it comes to free software.
In Brazil, for example, I think 7 to 10% of the desktops in active use at home and in small businesses today is based on Linux. And that's substantially higher than what you would find running the Mac environment. So it's on its way to becoming one of those sort of standard de facto platforms.
And we're off to the small town in Chile, which has just claimed a technological first for South America, despite one or two glitches.
The first problem that we found is the old houses that are built in that region is made using clay and wire mesh in between the walls, so we have to face some interference problems.
That's all right here on Digital Planet from the BBC. So you made a fortune in the .com explosion, you've been on holiday to the International Space Station as the world's first space tourist, and you're still only in your early 30s. So what next? Well, if it was me, I have to admit I'd probably get a yacht, a couple of fast cars and retire. Luckily though, tech entrepreneur Mark Shuttleworth has a rather greater sense of purpose than me. He's established a philanthropic foundation for creating free software aimed at people in his native South Africa and throughout the developing world. The Mark Shuttleworth Foundation is behind a software suite called Ubuntu, based on Linux. Now, like Microsoft Windows or Mac OS, Linux is an operating system, but the difference is you don't have to pay for it. Well, early next week, Mark Shuttleworth's addressing the GovTech e-Government conference in Pretoria, and I caught up with him earlier to get a sneak preview of what he's going to be saying. I wondered why people should bother with Linux-based operating systems like, say, Mark's Ubuntu, when so many computers come pre-installed with an operating system anyway.
Well, that's actually a very Western perspective, that you buy a computer and it just has Windows on. That's certainly true here in London, but it's absolutely not true in Jakarta or Manila or Beijing. In those countries, the cost of proprietary software, so for example, Windows and Office or the Mac OS and the equivalent Office infrastructure, could be as much as a year's salary for someone. And that's just really not a great economic value proposition. They tend to go one of two ways. They tend either to end up with pirated software, which in many countries is now becoming both illegal and enforced as illegal, or they start considering alternatives. And so necessity being the mother of invention, we're seeing really rapid adoption of Linux as a standard desktop environment in some of those emerging market countries. In Brazil, for example, I think 7 to 10% of the desktops in active use at home and in small businesses today is based on Linux. And that's substantially higher than what you would find running the Mac environment. So it's on its way to becoming one of those sort of standard de facto platforms.
Right, so being of South African origin yourself, your interests very much are in South Africa, a country that you've described yourself as having that sort of combination, intriguing combination of being both a kind of highly developed country, but also with the opportunities and issues related to an emerging economy. What role do you see open source software playing in the future development of South Africa?
I think that intersection of development, philanthropy, and commercial opportunity is what really motivates me to put all of my time and energy into a project like Ubuntu. I'm incredibly privileged today, specifically because Linux existed 10 years ago. 10 years ago, when I was dreaming up new businesses to start on the internet during the .com boom, it was only because I had access to Linux that I could effectively be self-empowered. And despite being a kid in Cape Town, which is kind of as far away from the nexus of Silicon Valley as you can get, certainly in bandwidth terms, I was able to build something small, but something that could compete globally. And so a lot of my desire to accelerate the adoption of free software comes from a desire to see that same opportunity given to people in every sector and in every country. There are schools in this country, in the United Kingdom, which could benefit tremendously from giving their students access to this openness of technology, because even in a school which is traditionally considered a poor school, you might have a few brilliant students who have the motivation to succeed. And given a free software platform, they can effectively accelerate their own learning in a way that they just can't in the old sort of traditional proprietary world. So yes, that intersection of philanthropy and development is very, very interesting to me, and a key ingredient, I think, of the current acceleration and adoption of Linux.
And as far as Ubuntu is concerned, I mean, you have different versions, if you like, or variants of it, one of which is Edubuntu, which I'm assuming is aimed very much at schools.
Yeah, so what we've seen is that people who become part of this broad Ubuntu community find that they can start to relate to other people who have similar specialized needs to them. And a sort of a sub-community or an embedded community then forms around that specialist interest group. And one of the key groups that we saw forming very earlier was around education. And so we formalized that as sort of a spin-off of the Ubuntu project called Edubuntu. And there are a couple of others, similar sorts of spin-offs. Some of them form around culture and languages. So there are derivative works of Ubuntu that are specific to Brazil, for example, or to various regions in Spain or Germany or various countries in Asia. So each of these kind of specialist groups starts informally, but then over time, if they gain momentum and there's substantial numbers of people who have a common interest, then we help them to turn that into something that can be shared as a common free platform.
But it's not just kind of sharing platforms and sharing code and operating systems and so on. It's also information. And another thing that you're really into is that idea of wikis, if you like, shared information. I guess Wikipedia is the best example of that, the best known one. So you're thinking about wikis aimed at, again, education in Africa.
This very interesting project aims to produce a complete set of educational content. So what we would traditionally think of as textbooks for all ages, for all subjects in South Africa, but to produce them in a format which can be edited directly through the web by anybody. And the idea is to try and create a culture of collaboration between teachers, between students, effectively helping to improve one another's textbooks and materials and tests and teaching plans and so on. You pointed out Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a wonderful example of how powerful this collaborative idea can be, but also how important it is to put the right social structures around that collaboration so that what you end up with is not graffiti on a wall, but is something that is of substance and has depth and clarity associated with it. So we want to try and achieve the same thing with the educational curriculum effectively. That'll be a sort of a multi-year project. We're working with the South African government to we'll produce the content and we'll give them the content free of charge. My hope is that we really can transform the textbook industry, as it were, in a very good way. Of course, established players will feel threatened by this, by the fact that once we're done, it will be possible to print out your own textbook that's absolutely certified at no cost other than the cost of printing. But my hope is that they will see that as a catalyst for new ways of thinking about content and teaching and curriculum.
That's Mark Shuttleworth giving me that exclusive interview earlier on. I'm now speaking exclusively to Bill Thompson, our regular studio expert. Bill, we've heard there about Ubuntu. It's an operating system. Does that mean you could effectively replace the existing operating system on your computer and using Ubuntu would be much the same as what you had originally?
Absolutely. I mean, Ubuntu it's a version of the GNU Linux operating system, so it's freely distributed, and it replaces Windows or Mac OS or anything else you might be using and does all the same jobs. And the thing that makes Ubuntu really important is that a lot of effort has gone into making it easy to install and also easy to use. It's not that it replicates Windows, it does its own things, but it's pretty intuitive, it's pretty straightforward. So people who are perhaps not so confident about computer use to start with can very quickly get up to speed with Ubuntu.
Because that question I asked Mark is, I've already got I've got Windows on one machine and I've got a Mac with Mac OS, so I wouldn't necessarily want to kind of wipe those off and start from scratch with Ubuntu. He said rightly, look, that's not the point, Gareth. That my perspective might be seen as a Western perspective.
Well, your perspective is a privileged Western perspective as well. If you're going to get just a raw machine, something that doesn't come pre-fitted with an operating system, then one of the Linux variants is a really good option for people because, as Mark said, it's not going to cost you any money. If you want to change it and you have those technical skills, you can get support, and it will do all the things that the other commercial operating systems can do. And that's the point that really sort of needs to be made, that it will do all of the same things. So it's not just a second-rank replacement, it is a perfectly adequate alternative.
And so it might be great, especially if you're working in a school and you buy a whole load of computers, or even second-hand ones with out-of-date operating systems. Why not install something like Ubuntu onto them? Because it's free, fantastic, and it does all the same things.
Indeed, lots of people are doing that. And then on top of the operating system, you do the really exciting stuff Mark was talking about, which is you have all the sort of free content, textbooks and stuff like that, and you forget about the operating system. In a sense, it shouldn't matter. What should matter is how you're using the computers. Ubuntu is a means to an end, not the end itself.
All right, Bill, thanks for that. We'll speak to you again in a few moments. And in fact, as Mark Shuttleworth was saying in that interview just now, open source desktops and software are increasingly popular in Brazil. And indeed elsewhere in South America, the Venezuelan president Hugo Chavez has insisted that all government IT should be based on open source. So whilst free software is sweeping that region, so it seems is wireless internet access. Wi-Fi has now even reached the sleepy Chilean provincial town of Salamanca, tucked away in the foothills of the Andes, where the locals have just been set up with free municipal wireless. And it's all thanks to the mayor, who managed to persuade a number of donors, including even the local copper mine, to stump up some funding for the scheme. Perhaps he tempted them by claiming that this would be South America's first such free community wireless hotspot. But many of the good folk of Salamanca had never even used a computer before they found themselves in the spotlight for their new hotspot. So how have they taken to the no-fee Wi-Fi? Well, we sent the BBC's Jane Chambers to find out. And she started by speaking to Ignacio Lopez, who works for the tech community Atina Chile, the organisation which coordinated the project.
Acabamos de finalizar la primera etapa.
We've just finished the first stage, which was installing the technology and making sure that the community are computer literate. We got volunteers in to teach them how to use a computer. Now it's time for the second stage, which is more long-term. We really want to make sure that the people living here use the technology we've given them to its full potential.
One person who's taking full advantage of the new technology is local taxi driver Pedro Saavedra. I've come to meet him in the town square, where I can already see that the community is using its free access to Wi-Fi. Just across the square from me, sitting in the shade, there are a couple of people sending emails from their laptops. What I want to know is if Pedro had ever used a computer before.
Jamás, señorita, no hemos tenido la oportunidad, sí, porque no sabíamos absolutamente nada.
Never in all my 60 years had I even switched on a computer. But after my course, my life has completely changed. We're 300 kilometres from the capital, Santiago, but now I can order spare parts, look at car prices, and all thanks to using the computer.
What's the connection like here? Do you find it easy to use?
Tenemos que tener un poquito paciencia.
Well, you have to have a bit of patience, but really you need to go to the antennas and not wait for them to come to you. It was the same when we first had television here. If you wanted to see a football match, we needed to go up to the local cemetery to get the best connection.
Eduardo Lode works for D-Link, the company which installed the technology, and he explained to me some of the difficulties they've had.
One of the first problem that we found is the old houses that are built in that region is made using clay and wire mesh in between the walls, so we have to face some interference problems.
So what happened with the connection when it came up against the wire mesh? What was the problem you were suffering there?
We lost the connections.
And so what was the solution to the problem?
The solution was used more specific antennas oriented directly to the central node. Currently we have 11 nodes. In every single node we include a firewall, switch, access points and a specific antenna in order to provide the Wi-Fi coverage in an omnidirectional way. Every node is connected with each other in order to provide a network using a 2 megabits per second connection. We are implementing in the next month of November an upgrade to 8 megabits per second. Currently, every single user can use the connection at 64K. Just connection is suitable for data, emails mainly. When we implement the upgrade, we are providing 128 and 256K. With that connection, we can improve some voice or multimedia applications.
In a poor community like this, it's often very difficult to get access to a computer. But the mayor's opened up the local school after classes so people can use the 80 computers there. And a local retailer has also decided to sell computers at a more competitive price. In general, it's the young who are really taking advantage of Wi-Fi. Katarina and Astrid are two 8-year-olds who I chatted to in the square.
We always use it to chat to friends and do homework and to play games online. It is so easy to use. The computer helps you with everything. Although the connection is not great at home, we can only get it downstairs.
But despite teething problems, Ignacio Lopez from Atina, Chile, is confident that the next step is nothing short of a social revolution.
En Salamanca no hay universidades y no hay institutos. Los alumnos.
Here in Salamanca, we don't have any universities, so people have to study elsewhere, and it's expensive for their families to phone them. We want to ensure everyone has access to Skype. We've also started a community blog, so people can get involved and have contact with the town wherever they are in the world. Another important issue is healthcare. There aren't enough medical centres here, so we're setting up links with the medical facilities at universities so people can consult doctors online through Skype or Messenger. We want to link up with other cities around the world that are similar to Salamanca. This really has opened up a whole world of opportunities which before just weren't available.
Ignacio Lopez ending that report from Jane Chambers in Chile, here on Digital Planet from the BBC World Service in London. With me, Gareth Mitchell. Still to come, how to practice the piano, but without a piano, just the power of thought. But first, time for a quick email. Maybe we can help somebody out here. We've had this email from Eugene Banja, who's contacted us from Kenya, and apparently he's been using an internet messenger system, he tells us, and he suspects that he's downloaded a virus somehow, or maybe some spyware, and in his email he says, several of my friends have told me they had to reformat their hard drives because of it. Bill Thompson, help me, and Eugene here. Does he need to reformat his hard drive?
Not necessarily. That's really the last resort if you do think you've got a virus or something like that. The first thing is, if your computer's behaving really abnormally, is disconnect from the internet, because it may be sending out your personal information or sending out emails to people like your friends and stuff like that. Once you've done that, get your hands on a good antivirus package, ask a friend or perhaps go to a cyber cafe or somewhere like that, download it, put it onto a CD, run it on your computer, and also if you're using Windows, get the Windows Defender package free from Microsoft. If you run both of those on your PC while it's not connected from the internet, in most cases you should be able to clear things up, then you can reconnect and then you should be okay, most of the time.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Bill. And Eugene, let us know how you get on. You can contact us. Our email address is digital.planet@bbc.co.uk. That's digital.planet@bbc.co.uk. And also, that place in Chile, Salamanca, claims to be the first place to have a free municipal wireless system. Are they wrong? If you're in South America and you have one in your part of the world, then let us know. You've got the email address there. Well, finally, here's proof that in music, practice really does make perfect. That's Cassie Yukawa, who's 50% of the Yukawa-chan piano duo, and you can hear her there demonstrating her astonishing virtuosity. I think I can safely assume, though, that she's the only person I've ever met who's embellished her practice by sticking some electrodes on her head and staring at a computer screen. Now, it was all part of an experiment into a technique called neurofeedback, which is the centrepiece of a new exhibition at London's Science Museum. Well, Cassie described her experiences as a neurofeedback guinea pig.
Every week for 1 year I had 20-minute training sessions, and in this time I had electrodes stuck to different points in my head, and I was sat in front of a computer screen, and I was given the task of changing the shape of a bar on the screen. And of course, to be told this the first time round, it's like playing a computer game without any kind of control but your thoughts. So I would be looking at the screen and controlling the movement of the bar, and I would be rewarded by the bar actually growing as I would actually not be directing my thoughts into making the shape larger, but it was through actually me relaxing and to let that infuse the music making. So it really connected those things up in a really bizarre way.
So this was like a computer game in a way, like a simple computer game that you were controlling through the power of thought. And through that, you think, through this kind of neurofeedback loop, as the scientists call it, you were able to focus in a way that helped you with your musical practice and your performance. And what seems funny is that you've got this, what we often think of as quite cold, logical, clinical technology interacting with your higher level artistry.
Well, this is what I completely was not expecting to experience. It was a very bizarre thing, the fact that I would be in this scientific environment, this lab situation, where I was a guinea pig for this latest technology. But actually I was encountering that space, which is perhaps one of better words, quite a spiritual space. And it's something quite akin to similar experiences I've had in meditation or various other activities that you would not sort of associate with a scientific experiment.
And so the bottom line is, has it improved your performance?
It's definitely opened up my creativity and made me feel more and more comfortable by having pockets of time where I'm literally just focusing on that space, where I'm just sitting there and doing absolutely nothing else with my physical self. My mental self is going on this very fantasy-like journey where I will even get dreamscape images and bizarre sort of floating memories, and it's like I have a backdoor secret passageway into making these connections and forming new bonds in my mind where I'm not doing anything with like playing the piano, but it's exercising that muscle.
Profound stuff. That's Cassie Yukawa. Well, also at that exhibition was John Grisella. He's the neuroscientist who performed the performance-enhancing technique on Cassie at Imperial College in London. He's now at Goldsmiths, University of London. He says that neurofeedback is about building on brain monitoring methods that have already been used in medicine for some time.
It means recording brainwave activity, just as all hospitals have done for half a century. But what we do is we feed back a representation of it to the participant in real time. So they may have their eyes closed with slow rhythms being produced, and they hear nice sounds, which are rewarding because they're so beautiful, and the brain likes this and will turn on the rhythm again so that it hears the sound again.
So the musician is sitting there with some kind of headphones on, listening to these sounds. But where are the sounds actually coming from?
Well, we have the electrical activity is measured, produced on a computer screen. We monitor that, and that is connected with the sounds, which are then fed back to the participant.
And so, putting it very simplistically, it's almost like the brain waves, if I can call them that, are generating the sounds or leading those sounds to be generated. And somehow, by kind of listening and focusing in on those sounds, then the brain waves themselves can be enhanced in some way?
Yes, indeed. I mean, the brain does the work, basically.
And so, in the same way that you might have some various feedback mechanisms for improving your physical performance in sport or something, you're doing the same thing, but with the brain.
Exactly. And we found that artistry and performance in our studies was enhanced. In fact, by as much as 2 classes of honours. It's quite a remarkable effect.
So you mean a musician using this might bump up their musical ability by 2 grades, if you like, in musical exams?
Exactly, and then we've also extended this to dancing, found professionally significant improvements in only 5 weeks, for example.
And so on Digital Planet, we're interested in the technology behind all this. You know, I guess you have certain computing models that you need to run, different kinds of sensings. How does that come into play?
It is just state-of-the-art EEG recording, but the difference being is that it's fed back to the person in real time.
But I've done a little bit of music myself, largely unsuccessfully, but through practice I've managed to come better. Is this, all about taking practice in any kind of art or performance and, in a way, I suppose, refining what goes on naturally when people practice?
Yeah, well, of course, practice has a lot to do with technique, so you've obviously got to have the underpinning of the technique. But then the artistry comes on top of that. And this seems to be where we're functioning most specifically.
You can't help wondering what there is in all this for the rest of us. I'm long since my school days, but there are many things in life I'd like to get better at. Can this kind of neurofeedback through the technology that you use ultimately be applied to people like me?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we've just taken it into microsurgery with trainee eye surgeons and showed that they improve. Another side of the coin is that well-being is affected by some of this too. So, of course, that can help us all.
That's John Grisella speaking to me at London's Science Museum. So, Bill Thompson, regular studio expert, just to remind everybody, this is almost like science fiction, all this neurofeedback.
It is, and it reminds me of one of my favourite science fiction novels, which is called Neuromancer, written by William Gibson back in 1984. And he predicted a world in which we would jack into what he called cyberspace. He coined the term cyberspace by sort of plugging ourselves into the network. And it's almost as if sort of the scientists and neurologists liked his book so much they've decided to make it happen and spend billions of dollars and all these years doing it, because we're now getting to the point where we can start to see ourselves interacting with our computer systems literally just by thinking.
And yeah, they seem to have moved beyond the realm of science fiction, because certainly, I mean, Kasi Yukawa, who's she's a really serious and wonderfully talented classical musician, was saying it had helped her. She wasn't just making it up. So it does seem like science fiction has led to some kind of reality.
Oh, I think that there's a difference, though, between, if you like, the control elements and the training elements, that learning almost a form of meditation, of guided meditation by using the technology is clearly important, and it helps. But it's also the implications that we can now start to, if you like, if not interpret our thoughts, at least extract intentions from brainwave patterns. So people can learn how to shape their brainwaves in a way that can be read by an EEG, interpreted by a computer software, and then used to control equipment. And that's, I think, what really excites me.
Yeah, exactly. And it does mean just being able to tone up your brain muscles. And again, Cassie, I think, speaks of her brain almost as if it is a muscle. It's just another way of helping to kind of train all that up.
Well, it's just another organ. And I think one of the things that neuroscience has shown us over the past 20 or 30 years is just how much specialisation there is of brain function, just how much the brain can be dealt with as an organ, and we can start to isolate locations where we have memory and other thought. This is just a practical application of that.
Great, exercising her organ, even though she plays the piano. Sorry about that gag, Bill. We'll have more from you next week. That's about it for today. In fact, this time last week, I told you that we'd be following technology users around this week. To be honest, we have just run out of time. So we're going to run that the week after next. And next week, we've set the whole programme aside to do a gaming special. We've been recording some material for that this week, and we've got some great stuff. So that's a game special this time next week on Digital Planet with me, Gareth Mitchell, the producers, Anya Liktorovitz. See you with your console next week.